the chance.
And the Minister has indicated that he would like to make a contribution at this moment in time, but don't worry, the debate then can continue after the Minister. George Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's a great pleasure to be here today, and isn't this a wonderful example of what Fridays are for? Proper debate, cross-party, tackling a serious issue. And I wanted to start by paying tribute to the Honourable Member for Cardiff West and the Select Committee for their substantial report in the summer, which I can assure you that I and officials in both DCMS and BEIS have read very carefully, and it's because of that report that we're having this debate today. And I also wanted to pay tribute to all of those colleagues so far who spoke. I know there are more who want to speak, but I wanted to take this opportunity, if I may, to set out the headlines of the government's response in order that honourable members opposite can decide and hear how they want to respond before deciding. And in particular, I wanted also, I can't pay tribute to everyone who's spoken, but I did want to mention the honourable member for Malden, the former Minister for DCMS and distinguished chair of the DCMS Select Committee, whose comments were important and well noted, and my honourable friend, the member for Warrington South, who demonstrated his particular personal experience in the industry, and a whole range of voices which I've been listening to very carefully. And the tone of this debate, I think, has been extremely welcome. And I paid tribute again to the honourable member opposite for bringing it in that way and to see the level of cross-party engagement. And I think that's all to the good. And it's what the public expect us to do on a Friday in private members' business, to come together and tackle key issues. I'm responding today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the Government as Minister for Innovation at the Department of Business and Minister for Copyright and for Intellectual Property, which is what the bill before us actually amends in law. But I'm here as a member of a government that is taking this issue very seriously, and we're working very closely with DCMS and my Department of BEIS. And in my primary responsibilities, I'm responsible for innovation across government, and I wanted just to put this in the context of the broader opportunity for digital innovation in our economy, from both the sort of deep digital technologies of AI and quantum and those technologies that I'm looking to support through our science and innovation budget, but also the role of important digital clusters, the gaming community and others in driving innovation in medical technologies and in a whole range of other parts of our digital economy. Indeed, earlier this summer I took the Big Tent Foundation to Coventry and were joined by the Secretary of State for BEIS to celebrate the work of the often unseen digital entrepreneurs in the gaming cluster, who are not often seen in the newspapers, but they're actually driving huge investment, innovation and opportunity for people to engage in the digital economy. And it was for that reason that yesterday at the Levelling Up Cabinet we had a long conversation about the importance of the digital creative sector in supporting opportunities around the economy. And I would just make the observation that many of our now most celebrated digital and technology clusters actually started with a very strong cultural and artistic and musical element. And in fact, Silicon Valley started in the 60s as a home for non-conformist, free-thinking, fresh-thinking entrepreneurs before the term was really widely understood. And it was because of the lifestyle, the surfing and the music that laid the foundations for what is now the world's greatest technology cluster. Similarly, in Cornwall, you're seeing the merger of lifestyle, recreational tech entrepreneurs. It's linked to surfing and music. So music isn't just in a silo, and I wanted to make that point. But I'm also here, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in a personal capacity. My family has substantial interests. I mean, I'm not declaring commercial interests. I don't have any myself. But my brother works in the film industry, and I just observed that in that industry, genuinely, I think people are better paid. It's a bit feast or famine. When there's a film, people tend to get paid pretty well, and then between films, it's a bit famine-ish, but they are paid well. My wife is a theatre director, and I just observed that in theatre, people are rather less well paid than in film. Many of them work in film sometimes, if they're lucky. But I also have, we have in our house a family friend who's a lodger. He's a nocturnal entrepreneur. I see him only at the beginning and end of the day. And I asked him the other day, what are you doing upstairs? And he's a digital music entrepreneur. He's making music at night. And I asked him how the streaming sector is working. And it was very interesting, his response. And I just want to share it with the House. He said, if it wasn't for Spotify, no one would know me. I'm using the streaming platform to get noticed. I don't make any money out of it, but what happens is people then pick me up on TikTok, they pick me up on Instagram. They then reach out and message me, and he said, I'm now selling cassettes. At which point I looked at him, because I'm old enough, Mr. Speaker, to have had a collection of cassettes. Indeed, when I bought the last car but one, I was worried there wasn't a cassette player in it, and what I was going to do with my old cassettes. And then I had the same with my CDs, and I said, cassettes? He said, yes. And as other colleagues around the House more knowledgeable than me have highlighted, there is now a huge market in cassettes, as indeed there is in the renaissance of vinyl. So my lodger has used the streaming sector to create a footprint for himself, and of course what he really wants to be able to do is to fill venues. And when I asked, could you fill a venue here in London, he said, I could half fill in London, but I could fill 10 venues in Los Angeles. And I think that speaks volumes to the level of global digital entrepreneurial activity that's going on in this country. And of course, the pandemic has robbed many of our musical artists of those venue-related, event-related incomes, and has highlighted, I think, a lot of the issues that the Select Committee have rightly brought to the fore in the impact of the level of digitalisation in the music industry. And my headline message is really that we want to view this in government as a creative industries ecosystem and make sure that Britain is the best place in the world for musicians to practice, to innovate, to create, recognising that we are in an incredibly competitive global environment, and nobody wants to pass a well-intended law that inadvertently undermines the UK's position as a leading centre. And we need to think in this debate about the artists, the labels, in this case the musicians, the labels and the platforms, and the relationship between those three in creating a functioning, vibrant and innovative and indeed profitable ecosystem in which revenues are distributed fairly and in a way that leads to UK leadership. And my commitment is, on behalf of the government, that we'll take this moment, this report and this very well presented bill, to do what many of us have urged us to do in the House. Look quickly, not to delay, but look quickly at all of the issues and the impacts, and make sure that we frame a government response that doesn't just deal with the immediate issue today, but in 10 or 20 years, our successors in this House say that Parliament got it right and tackled it in the right way. And that is really about, yes, fairness, an important word, I think an important value that most people listening to this debate, who may not understand the complexities, and boy, there are many, of the modern digital music streaming ecosystem, people understand fairness. They understand that fairness doesn't mean everybody being paid the same amount every day. That tends to lead to a communist society where very little is to be distributed. But fairness means that people are rewarded properly and appropriately for their part in an ecosystem, reflecting the role of others and competition. But it's also about making sure that the UK remains a powerhouse in the global digital ecosystem, and in particular that our musicians, which is what this bill focuses on, are properly rewarded. I wanted to highlight that, of course, musician is one word, but it covers a multitude of different people, from singers, bands, DJs, instrumentalists, non-featured artists, session musicians, backing singers, lyricists, composers. There's a huge range of people who, before we legislate, we just need to be cognizant that we will be legislating to shape their lifestyles, their livelihoods. And it's part of my responsibility as a minister to make sure that we listen to all of them, even those who aren't so noisy, and make sure that before we change the law, we are cognizant of any unintended side effects. And we need to make sure that all musicians are benefiting from the UK legal framework, not just be pushed by one group without being cognizant of the effects of others. And I wanted just to highlight, and indeed I didn't know this before preparing in the last 2 or 3 weeks for this debate, how musicians actually do make their money. If you look at the data, 31% live performances is the main revenue stream, and of course that has been hit very hard by the pandemic, which is what's brought this to the fore. And then teaching of music, 9%, audio streaming royalties, 6%, physical sales, 5%, digital sales, 5%, session or orchestral work, 5%, broadcast, 5%, public performances, 4%, commissions for stage, 3%, merchandise, 3%, video streaming royalties, 3%, and then a whole raft of other. The truth is there are multiple revenue streams for most musicians, and some, of course, only receive some of those. But we need to be cognizant of the broader musician revenue stream and how complex it is before we legislate. And when a song is streamed on a service like Spotify, revenue from that stream flows through a streaming value chain, which has taken shape in the last few years. At the start, the streaming service takes its cut, and there's no industry standard, but typically that's about 30%, and the rest gets split back down the supply chain between all the other parties. And of course, people's ability to negotiate is, of course, dependent on their strength in the market. I dare say if I, Mr. Deputy Speaker, was to produce a piece of music, I suspect my negotiating power would be very weak in the market, whereas the band already here in the House, led by colleagues, have already established that they do have an audience and a market, and I pay tribute to their work, both in the way they've used those revenues to support charity and to highlight the issues in the House. But it is a competitive market, and it should be such. I think all of us here who live by making our way on our feet, speaking to issues, would fully accept that if we went to Hyde Park Corner, some of us would attract bigger audiences than others. And I don't think we'd pass a bill that says the public must be compelled to listen to all of us for the same amount of time with the same level of interest. You can't legislate for that. And I think all of us know that. But we do want to make sure that successful artists who are generating quality music are rewarded properly, and to make sure that we're doing that. And I want to make the point, we do accept there is a problem, and we do accept the fundamental case made by the Select Committee, and we've already started in launching the Competition and Markets Authority. This is a very vertical industry, if I can put it out that way, and we want to make sure that the revenues are flowing fairly and that there isn't any anti-competitive practice. And we're also looking through the Intellectual Property Office at how other countries have done it. There have been a number of reforms around the world, and we want to make sure we've collected the data on any reforms that have worked positively for musicians across the board and those that have had negative effects. And I should say in the last 2 weeks, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I've had extensive meetings with the Honourable Member opposite in a very positive spirit, with colleagues on this side of the House, the Honourable Member for Tatton, and about 40 or 50 colleagues who've taken interest. I've also taken the time I have to meet people in the industry, and I just share with colleagues before they decide how they want to proceed that views are very mixed. I mean, for example, the Association of Independent Music, I've had 50 submissions this week, which I was reading late last night. The Association of Independent Music have said, we don't believe the solutions in this bill. They do accept the case of the Select Committee as a problem, but we don't accept that the solutions in this bill proposed will lead to the outcomes its supporters hope for, and the bill risks damaging independent music by making the UK a less attractive place. The British phonographic industry have said the bill is premature in rushing to a legislative solution before the market impact has been properly explored. We've had submissions from a huge range of those hugely creative and entrepreneurial UK labels. I'm not even going to begin to read out all the list, but I have here a letter with at least 20 logos on it, and all of them, I think, have written. In November, a group of them wrote to the Prime Minister and said, we're writing as a group of British independent record labels concerned about the unintended impact. I don't think anybody has any doubt with the intent of the bill put before the House today, or indeed the Select Committee's work behind it, but the unintended impact on our industry, the Copyrights Bill, which is due to be debated in the House, urging us not to accept it quickly as it is written, but to take it as a spur, as indeed the Honourable Member himself has urged us to do, as a spur to do the necessary research. And indeed, I would highlight Jeepster Recordings, based in Hackney, wrote to the Honourable Member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington, who I don't think is here today, but to say they're writing from Jeepster Recordings in Stoke Newington. We're an independent record company based in that constituency, begun in 1996, have a very small, creatively successful back catalogue, including the early Bell and Sebastian and Snow Patrol albums, and they're very concerned. We have deep concerns about the impact of this bill on the future of our business, and feel that there are parts of the bill that, if approved, would destroy a business we've managed to keep going for 26 years. As with a lot of small labels, we invested a large amount of money in our artists and struggled as a company at a financial loss for many years whilst promoting them in a market skewed in favour of the major labels, which is the point that the bill is really tackling. But I just highlight that we're very keen to make sure we get this right, and that we pass a piece of legislation if that's what it takes, or indeed we work with the Competition and Markets Authority to put in place the right measures to make sure that the industry, the labels, respond in the right way. Ultimately, where we'd like to get to before the long and slow process of legislation, if we could get there, we'd like to find an industry solution And it's for that reason that we've brought together a whole series of working groups with industry to start to put feet to the fire and ask some hard questions about what they're doing to make sure that we are properly remunerated. Yes, I'll happily give way.
Grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. There's a huge interest across the House, real concern about getting this right. I suppose often the House can come together like this on an issue, and then somehow in government it can go into the sidings. So can he reassure the House and all the colleagues across this House who want to see action, want to see this taken forward energetically, that he and the government are committed to doing so?
Well, I'm grateful to my friend, the distinguished former minister and backbencher, for raising that point. I myself have raised private members' bills and 10-minute rule bills and have them adopted by government. I've withdrawn them on the basis of an undertaking from the minister. I have spoken to the honourable member opposite, and I understand that he obviously wants to make the point, but I'm just asking politely at the box, for the record, whether he might be prepared to withdraw the bill today and work with me on tackling the measures and then bring it back in due course if he feels that the measures I put in place are inappropriate. But I'll happily give way.
Thank you. I thank the Minister. I do thank him for the approach he's taking. We have discussed this before. I do think it's important that the bill, does have a chance at least to proceed into committee, because, as he said, this is a long process and the government does control the timetable. So my view is this is a bus that he could, reupholster along the road if he wanted to make it fit for purpose that we could all agree on, and that the House should have the opportunity to express its opinion. I know he understands that.
I totally understand the House will want to have a chance to express its opinion. He knows well that the private members' bill process is not an ideal process for us to do the work we need to do in government. We've launched the Competition and Markets Authority. We've got a series of work streams which I want to describe in a moment, and I would like to think that over the next few months, and yes, I'll happily give way.
To him for giving way, and I appreciate the positive narrative that he is giving to this bill. But I'm very concerned by what he said about Spotify, in the sense that Spotify offering exposure to musicians ought to be enough that they can then go make their money elsewhere. Surely there should be a real commitment that there is a fair relationship, that these major, powerful organisations offer more than just exposure.
Yeah, thank the honourable member for that. I wasn't actually, and I don't think that the record will show that I was suggesting that that in itself is enough always. I was just making the point that actually Spotify and other streaming services have provided a platform for many artists who simply wouldn't otherwise get a chance to get any following to acquire some following. But he's right in that we need to make sure that the revenues are flowing fairly, and that is why indeed we have launched that Competition and Markets Authority work. And as I say, the Intellectual Property Office in my department are looking at other countries, and we've set up a number of task forces which I will describe. But on the point, before the House decides whether it wants to force the question now about whether the bill proceeds, I wanted to answer the point about our commitment. Of course.
Very quickly. Concern has been expressed on both sides about the value gap issue, which particularly relates to YouTube against some of the other streaming services. And in the CMA's report to response to the Select Committee, they say whilst they recognise that, then they don't think at the moment it should come within the CMA's measures through the Digital Market Unit. So can he say, will the government's examination take into account the concerns about the value gap and the proportion being taken by the platforms?
I'm delighted to give that undertaking. We will be both looking through the CMA at their specific remit in terms of competition, markets and anti-competitive practices. But yes, he makes an excellent point. We want to look more broadly at the value chain and making sure that there's a proper ecosystem in which, as I say, not everyone will be able to get equal remuneration, but that the market is working and that it's fair to the point that's been made. And yes, of course, we will be looking at that. Yes, happy.
Grateful to him for giving way. He's indicated that he is not very happy with the vehicle of this bill for taking action, but he has also said he accepts there's a problem. Can he be more specific in telling the House what his own time frame for action is?
Yes, I'm grateful. I was just coming to that. So we have already started the work through the CMA, and we've already started the work through the Intellectual Property Office and the task force. This is that I want to describe in a moment in more detail. The Secretary of State for DCMS and ourselves at BEIS have agreed that we want to be getting that information back within a matter of months, not and that we want to be coming back to set out the government's proposals within a matter of months. And we are aiming to be able to come back with a substantive response in the summer, certainly no later than September. It slightly depends on what we hear, but our instinct is that if we can avoid legislation but solve the problem in some other way, that's our first instinct. But indeed, I just want to make very clear, if we conclude that legislative change is the only way to achieve what the House is looking for, then that is very much open to us. But our instinct isn't to rush to pass a private member's bill to solve the problem, well-intended though it is, and but to do the work, come back quickly to the House with a set of proposals. But I want to make clear that if that does suggest that we need to be making legislative changes, we're very open to doing that. Let me then, Mr. Deputy Speaker, just begin to set out, if I may, the specifics of that work and what we're doing. And to make clear that that point about fairness that's been made by colleagues across the House sits right at the heart of that. We want to see a fair streaming environment, one in which UK music industry can thrive and artists are properly rewarded. Fairness is a broad concept, and it's one we can all sign up to, but there are many different aspects of fairness in this complicated industry. The bill proposes a number of specific measures aimed at making the streaming environment fair, which we think is a very laudable aim. We simply aren't yet either clear that the impact of all of those measures has been fully assessed, or indeed that there may not be some others that don't require legislation that might be able to have a similar impact. We have not ruled out legislation to introduce any of the measures contained in this bill, and indeed others, should our work suggest them. But we are concerned that interventions like this, made at pace like this now, could have, and indeed we think would have, some pretty significant consequences across the industry, as the correspondence that I've just flagged has indicated. We do not want to cause a crisis of confidence in the UK digital music sector and cause a disinvestment and create a bigger problem by moving too hastily without having taken the chance to listen to all those who have a stake. We have to get this right in a very complex ecosystem and supply chain, and the first step is for us to gather proper evidence from all of those who have concerns before deciding what government action we will take. And I'd say the honourable member opposite, who himself was a distinguished former minister, I think if he was in my shoes, he'd be saying something very similar. To that end, we have already commissioned research, as I say, into a number of the measures that are being brought forward, the Competition Markets Authority, the IPO, and liaising with industry stakeholders. And we want to work very closely with industry. And let me just take this opportunity to make clear to the industry, who will be watching this closely, that we do think there is a problem. We want to make sure we get it right, and we want to work with them to get the right measures in place. We'd prefer that not to be legislative, but if we can't find a solution with industry, then we hold open that opportunity. And we're not saying today that we won't legislate. We will, if that is the right thing to do. In the spring of this year, we'll be considering all of the evidence that we've received and setting out and thinking through how we need to respond. And that will include consideration of measures on all of the elements in this bill: equitable remuneration, contract adjustment, and the right to recapture works, as well as other possible market interventions. And I wanted just to make clear that I'm working very closely with the Minister of State at DCMS, and indeed the Secretary of State at DCMS, herself a distinguished author who has a very strong understanding of the issues of royalties, and the Secretary of State for Business and Innovation in my department. And our aim is simply this: to ensure that the UK is the best place in the world for musicians to come and practice and to find audiences globally and to harness the benefits of digitalisation, because we've created an ecosystem that is fair, innovative, competitive, both for individual artists but also for the UK. And to do that, we think it's right that we consider these issues sensibly and properly in the way that one would expect a government to. This week I have spoken to about 40 colleagues, and I've heard today probably another 40, and it's been great to hear colleagues across all parts of the House, and even the Scottish Nationalists have paid tribute to the government's listening on this, which is a nice thing to hear. I attended the government's music stakeholder contact group on Wednesday and heard the views of 11 stakeholders. I'm very grateful to them and others who've contacted us this week with their thoughts. I've had a very constructive meeting with a member for Cardiff West, and he I know is, and I want to pay tribute to him again, he's a passionate advocate, and we wouldn't be having this debate here today if it wasn't for him and colleagues on the Select Committee. I do just want to make the point that, interestingly, today is also the birthday of Ozzy Osbourne, Mr Deputy Speaker, the former lead singer of Black Sabbath, who through the power of music overcame learning disabilities and a difficult upbringing to become one of rock's elder statesmen. And I think that speaks to the power of music, not just to give us all joy, but to create opportunities for people who may otherwise struggle. And today was also the day in 1984 when Band Aid's Do They Know It's Christmas was released, a day I will never forget because I played 24-hour football listening to that one track for 24 hours. And it's a track that is ingrained into the very DNA of my subconscious as a result. So this is a good day. I also just reflect, Mr Speaker, that this bill, of course, this isn't the first moment this House has considered this issue. I'm old enough to recall Tim, now Lord Clement Jones's live music bill in another place, testing parliamentary support on more than one occasion before the then government was evidentially satisfied that it could support a version of this bill, becoming the landmark Live Music Act in 2012. So I think it's worth just recognising we aren't the first group of parliamentarians to consider it, but I think the pandemic has revealed the urgency of our dealing with it, which is why I've given the response that I have. So let me be very clear, we haven't ruled out legislation, we're just not prepared to rush today to adopt a private member's bill without working with all stakeholders, including the Honourable Member opposite. And I understand he may want to force a vote now, but I hope he hears in good faith my commitment to work downstream. The key is evidence-based policy making, Mr Deputy Speaker, and you wouldn't expect me as a Science Minister to believe in anything else. These are far-reaching measures, and we've got to build the evidence base so that we're satisfied that the measures we propose are right, but also so that, from a point of view of transparency, people around the country can see that government has listened to all the stakeholders and made a balanced view. And to intervene now without first doing that, I think, would be rash. Let me just say that the UK music industry is, as many colleagues today have said, at the absolute heart both of our arts and culture sector, the envy of the world, from the Beatles to the Rolling Stones, from Ed Sheeran to Stormzy, and a whole lot of names that I haven't even heard of, but have huge digital followings around the world. It is really hard to overestimate the value of that sector, but I can share some of the statistics which are worth just thinking about. The UK music industry pre-COVID contributed 5.8 billion to the UK economy in 2019. That was up 11% from 2018. That suggests that the UK music industry is in pretty rude health. It's growing and expanding. I'd also share this, that median reported income for musicians, this is quite interesting, currently signed to major record companies, in 2019, pre-pandemic, was 51,000. Median reported income for musicians signed to independent record labels, 20,000, and median reported income for self-releasing artists is 13,000. Now, I think the challenge we all face is how do we make sure that we create an ecosystem in which those hitherto unknown, often young, not always young, independent, breakthrough artists get the benefits of digitalisation and streaming to help them generate revenue in a whole myriad of ways. And the music creators' earnings in the digital era, that report, found no evidence that there was ever a time, sadly, when recorded music was the basis of substantial income for most musicians, even when revenues in the music industry were higher, as in the 90s. And it is difficult to compare the number of musicians who can earn a living from recorded music in the streaming era with the download CD, let alone tape era, because of the difficulties in assessing data. And one of the commitments I wanted to make to the House today is that we are looking to collect the data, both in the UK and internationally, so that we're able to make policy on the basis of actual fact about the impact of reforms around the world. And of course the Americans have recently made some reforms. There have been other reforms in other parts of the world. And a key part of this very dynamic sector is these independent labels, Rough Trade, Domino, Beggar's Banquet. There are so many, I couldn't list them all now and I don't intend to. But we do want to continue to support them, and when they're writing to say that they're worried this bill, well-intended though it is, will undermine them, we are concerned. Yeah, I'll happily give way. He did. Well, sorry, I thought the honourable member wanted to give way. So let me just turn then to the level of government support for the sector.
Kevin Brennan.
Beg to move that the question be now put.
Before I do that, I'd just like to say I'm delighted to learn of Ozzy Osbourne's birthday, as my late brother Barry Evans worked on one of his American tours. Very good. I accept the request to put the motion, the closure motion, to the House. So the question is that the question be now put. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division. Clear the lobby.